Hey there, welcome to the Snailed It Podcast with Danikka and Erin, brought to you by Author's Own Publishing.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Snailed It Podcast with Danikka and Erin. Today we are talking women authors and whether or not they're actually taken seriously. A rant. We started talking about this before we hit record, and then we just need to hit record because we're going to forget all of the insightful things that we say.
Yes, exactly. And it's one of those things, I feel like we come back to this kind of topic a lot. Like there's, the women prefer sex scenes written by women episode.
Mm-hmm.
There's just let women enjoy romance episode. Like if you can't tell, this is like something we get really fiery about a lot.
We do.
So we tried to space the episodes out for you.
We are kind of speaking specifically about fantasy today a little bit.
Yeah, because we did a couple of romance episodes. Now we're going to do fantasy, because this is something I get really, like, lots of people online get really peevish about. It's not unique to us. Like we literally were both just getting really fiery about this before we hit record.
Yeah.
Because women, almost exclusively, this happens to women. Their work, whether it has adult content or not, gets classified as young adult when it's fantasy, or it gets classified as romantasy or smut. Yeah.
And this is the bridge between YA, NA, adult, new adult for those who are unfamiliar with NA. So I find that interesting because people often mistakenly sort of push fantasy written by women into the young adult category, assuming that it's not quote unquote serious enough to be like adult fantasy, while in the same breath saying that it's got too much explicit content. It's like young adult doesn't generally have explicit content like that. Like they're generally, and I don't know, I'm very torn about whether or not there should be sex scenes in young adult.
Well, the young adult classification, young adult is under age of consent.
Yeah.
So
look, we understand that young people are having sex, obviously. However, the idea of an adult writing about people under the age of consent, writing sex scenes for those people, just feels a little bit on the nose. So the fact that these books are being pushed into young adults while still being accused of being too smutty is just this strange juxtaposition, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really, really weird. And I felt like we would probably end up going on just like too many circular tangents if we just like started ranting on this episode. So I found a couple of articles from The Guardian that have kind of two sides of this kind of debate coming through, because I thought they both captured them really well. Like normally I would try to go to like multiple different sources or find something outside, but I just felt like both of these articles, interestingly published by the same newspaper or the same media organization now, really encapsulated the argument really well.
Yeah.
So I want to start with the one that is very pro-romantasy. Hit novels by S.J. Mars and Rebecca Yarros offer more than sex and escapism. They've reclaimed the fantasy genre for women. And then here, the opening lines is, a strange and powerful creature has taken over the publishing industry. Romantasy, a magical union of romance and fantasy. And I just kind of feel like there's so many books written by men that have romantic subplots in them, or like they have characters that get together and go on epic journeys and things like that, but they're not classified as romantasy.
No, they're just called fantasy.
The one that I keep going back to is, and I mean, we talk about it a lot, is George R.R. Martin, with how much sex there is in Game of Thrones.
Yes, although I suppose those could not be classed as romantasy because a lot of the sex is non-consensual.
True, but there is couples that end up very much in love. So House of the Dragon, I think, is based also on books, and like people always, froth over Rhaenyra and her uncle. But that's a whole other issue with those books.
I watched that series, and Rhaenyra and her uncle, I feel like, is almost the least creepy parent in that series.
Yeah, I agree.
And like the King and Alicent, like she was Dawn's friend. We're already on a tangent. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But anyway, all I'm saying is that men write romantic subplots into their fantasy as well. There's The Witcher with Yennefer and Geralt. They have on again, off again kind of romance throughout the series. And
No one's calling that romantasy.
yeah, exactly. And like those are just the two off the top of my head. And like I do confess I don't read a lot of trad published fantasy written by men, especially not the big names, just because I want to read, independently published authors. And I honestly just genuinely have not read much in the last few years because I've been reading the books that I edit. Even so, I think about like Aragon is something that I read tons of when I was a kid, and he spent the whole book pining after Arya. But like they didn't get together, but that book was YA, so like I wouldn't have expected them together. But like there was also other couplings in those books. Like you don't see that being classified, but there's not enough romance. But anyway.
It's also that thing of, and it's not even that they're just called romantasy, it's that they're just called fairy smut or in Fourth Wing's case, dragon smut, even though that is wildly, my brain just forgot the word.
Inaccurate?
Oh my God. Wildly inaccurate because the dragon, okay, so 2 of the dragons are getting it on, but people are not getting it on with dragons in those books. Like when you think dragon smut, you think of dragons having sex or people having sex with dragons. That's not what's happening.
Yeah, that's
the people are riding the dragons. 2 of the dragons are a couple, but that's it anyway.
And okay, so this is just like before I go in further into the article, because I think Fourth Wing features in the article. But what is it about the sex in these books? If we say take Game of Thrones, which has dragons and has lots of sex, and we take Fourth Wing, which has dragons and has
sex,
a bit of sex, is it the fact that the sex in Fourth Wing is consensual? Is that what makes it smart?
Well, yeah, exactly.
So that's just some food for thought.
Is it the fact that the female is enjoying herself?
Yeah, exactly.
Smart.
Yeah. Is it just the fact that she hasn't been forced into marrying someone 50 years older than her, all of his babies? Or anyway, just some food for thought for people on like the way you're viewing women writers and the women having sex in books, to continue on that conversation of women prefer sex scenes written by women. But to get back to what we're talking about today and to go on from speaking about Fourth Wing. So I read the first book and I believe I read the second book. Yes, because we did.
Yeah, you did. Yep,
you
did.
In the Fourth Wing episode. I haven't read Onyx Storm. Anyway, so this article, and the links will be in the description of the podcast as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read excerpts out of it. So it's saying Yaros is following in the fairy dust of fellow American novelist Sarah J. Maas, who is credited with spearheading the genre with her hugely successful A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And they're speaking specifically of what they refer to in this article as the romantasy genre. In just 5 years, a genre born during the pandemic and rising on a blaze of book talk recommendations and emojis has gone from being a niche offshoot of young adult fiction to a once-in-a-generation phenomenon. In the past year, the market share of science fiction and fantasy books rose by over 41%.
That's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. So we're not discrediting the fact that, they've kept books alive, because I remember when ebooks came out and e-readers, people were like, oh, well, books are going to disappear. But in fact, they're having like a massive rise. So that's absolutely fabulous. So then they have a quote here from Yaros that basically she's like, they get to ride dragons and they get to ride each other. Yaros quipped of her new novel. So Yaros has been dubbed Dragon's Jilly Cooper and Mars's novels fairy porn. But in our porn-soaked culture, there is something old-fashioned about the sex scenes. This is Mills and Boon for millennials, not to mention Gen Z. Romantasy has reclaimed the geeky fantasy dominion for women, celebrating female friendship, agency, and sexuality. And I do appreciate this, a less sexist Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
For its devotees, the genre offers the joy of getting lost in another world and connecting with others. In the face of powerlessness and uncertainty in the real one, its message for young women seems compelling. And so, while I agree with a few of the points made in that article, overall, one, it perpetuates the thing that we've just been saying is problematic for women who don't lean into the whole sex sells around romantasy. And I think what you were saying before is I think, was it Fourth Wing or Iron Flame, where the book is only 12%.
So I saw a reel and I wish I could remember the exact percentages, but it was because obviously they're all Akata, Fourth Wing, all of those books are all just kind of called fairy porn, dragon smut, romantasy, whatever. The actual percentage of sex scenes in those books is 10 to 12% at best.
Yeah.
They are large books. Like, I'm pretty sure Onyx Storm was, like, they're over 600 pages, right? And so if maybe 60 pages of that book has nude characters, who cares?
Yeah.
Like,
It's not
there's so much other stuff going on in those books that is not about, and yes, there's pining and they're like thinking about how hot the other person is or whatever. But, you know, Violet, as much as she is also frustrating at points, she's still like kicking ass and taking names, as is Mira, her sister.
Yeah.
There was a line that you just read out that was about women aren't just like damsels in distress. They're the ones like saving people. Is that why they're being shit on? Because men don't like the idea of women being strong and capable?
Yeah, unless
in 2020, in 2025? Unless what?
Unless they've written them.
But do they ever?
Well, yeah, they do. If they do, like the first one that comes to the top of my head is Damien Coluccio, who we published.
True.
Majority of his characters are women, very well written women, well rounded and strong, but not in the stereotypical strong way. They're like and like he does a fabulous job, and like that actually leads me really well into the next article, which is written by men, and it's a response to
the first article
that I just read. So the title of the article is "Fantasy Fiction Doesn't Need Reclaiming for Women. They Already Write and Read It." And so the subheading is responding to an editorial about the surge in romantasy books. James Latimer writes that romance isn't only for girls. And he says, I was disappointed to read your review on romantasy fiction, which seemed to imply that the fantasy genre needed reclaiming for women. This does a huge disservice to the many excellent female fantasy authors, some recent, some around for decades, who have been a mainstay of the genre despite not writing romance or teen fiction. These women do not seem to get the recognition and readership that they deserve, despite some, such as N.K. Jemisin, Anne Leckie, Charlie Jane Anders, R.F. Kuang, and Martha Wells dominating genre awards. These authors also have to fight the continual misperception that they only write romantic or young adult fiction, which is exactly the fantasy that your article perpetuates. And also that authors like Rebecca Yarros really lean into selling and perpetuating and creating these massive fandoms around, which I don't have a problem with necessarily, because we're all trying to succeed as authors, but it's also, I think it's, again, like our value at Author Zone is community and surviving as authors as a whole, community, and supporting each other and lifting each other up. And I think the whole idea of, you know, stepping on other people and just only thinking about how you can succeed by marketing your book a certain way, no matter how it maybe damages other people in the genre, is maybe something we need to think about not doing as our industry evolves.
Yeah.
That's not in the article. That was just me adding to it. And then further he says, and this also raises all of the female fantasy readers who are not solely here for romantasy and have always been here. And then it's a very short letter at the start, and then he goes in and says other things. But he says, well, I'm glad that romantasy has sparked more interest in fantasy fiction, made the genre more inclusive, and made fantasy publishing in general more lucrative, though usually for publishers rather than most authors, perpetuating the myth that the non-romance genre is only for boys and that romance is only for girls is unfair. Sorry to have to mansplain this to you, but what I've seen, the writers themselves are too tired and appalled at having to continually wage the battle of the sexes to take up arms once more. Dragons are easier to defeat, it seems. And that's just, again, written by James Latimer at The Guardian. And then there's a second half of the article talking about snobbery around dragons being in books and that kind of thing. And I thought that was really interesting too, if people wanted to click the link in the description to go read the next part. But that was the part I really love, how he closed out his response to that first article, because it's true that continual just like perpetuating of women can only sell their books if they're selling the sexiness, and they can only sell to other women, and if they're selling the sexiness, then the other parts
then
of the
rest of it is irrelevant,
and it just continues to make the work of all women authors dismissed by men and readers in general, and not just dismissed by men, but dismissed by readers who consider themselves too good to read those types of books, because that is a problem that continues to exist in the wider book community. So like this critique isn't at the authors, it's not Like,
No.
as we always say, should be able to write what they want to write, should be able to read what they want to read. It's okay if you don't like reading sex. It's okay if you don't want to read it. And it's okay if you love it and want to read more of it. Like, that's not what we're saying.
It's also like if fantasy is not for you, like that's not, although I do kind of feel like maybe you haven't found if you've not enjoyed fantasy, because fantasy is amazing.
Yeah, I feel like fantasy is like such a huge umbrella genre. Like there's so many things.
Yeah.
And I mean, to fantasy itself, it falls under speculative fiction as an even bigger umbrella genre, and it can blend into so many different things. But that's another talk for another day. But like, I guess at the end of the day, N.K. Jemisin, for example, has been around in the industry for decades. And then if I think about, even just some Australian authors off the top of my head, we've got Kate Forsyth, we've got Melina Marchetta, who write wonderful fantasy and complex fantasy. Ursula K. Le Guin with science fiction, which is considered a branch of fantasy. They've been around for a really long time, and very philosophical writers who have strong messages in their books. Yeah, so I just really hope that this kind of trend starts to, because that's something that we kind of notice in general, is like these trends come up in waves, and then the kind of reasonable voices come up behind them and speak reason. If that makes sense. So I kind of hope that, like, yes, while the romantasy craze has done good things for the publishing industry overall, I'm really hoping that we can continue with more nuanced approach moving forward and continue to value women writers who've been around for a long time and who will continue to be around, and to uplift new women authors and help readers, broaden their bites when they're reading as well. Yeah. So it was a bit of a rant, but it was also a bit of a like,
we controlled ourselves.
Yeah.
That could have been way more ranty than it was.
Yeah. We could have been a lot angrier.
We could have, but we reined it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're really interested to hear what you think as well. As usual, we just love hearing your thoughts.
Yeah.
After these episodes. So is there, women writers who you feel like are lumped into romantasy and YA who definitely shouldn't be there, or who deserve more credit than what they're getting, wider readership? Or are there men writers who you think are marketed as, more serious than what they actually are? Should they be considered more romantasy, or should they be considered more YA than what they actually are?
Yes, have we been missing out on some man-written romantasy?
Yeah.
That we didn't know was out there.
I'd be really interested to know, because,
Same. Until next time.
We'll catch you in the next episode.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Snailed It Podcast with Danikka and Erin, brought to you by Author's Own Publishing, the home of indie publishing. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at Author's Own Publishing. Music brought to you by Mikkel, with more details in the show notes.